Okay, so get this. You guys sent in a ton of stuff about how babies learn to talk.
Yeah.
It's wild. We've got an article, what looks like a transcript from a radio show,
Hmm.
even a funny story about someone's kid.
Oh, cool.
And our mission for this deep dive, to figure out how those tiny humans go from goo-goo to full-blown conversations.
It's really one of the most amazing things we humans do,
Right.
to learn language.
It really is.
And it starts so early.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. I mean, we all love that moment when a baby says their first word.
Of course.
Like mama or dada.
Melts your heart.
Total heart melt.
Yeah.
But it's crazy because it's not like they just suddenly poof, they're talking.
Right.
There's this whole process, and it starts with babbling.
Yeah, you're right. It's definitely not magic, although it might feel like it sometimes.
It does.
Actually, speaking of babbling, one of the sources you sent had a little quiz
Oh.
about when babies usually start babbling. 6 months, 9 months, or a year.
Ooh, okay. And the answer is, drum roll please, 6 months.
That's right.
It's like clockwork no matter where in the world the baby's growing up.
It's pretty amazing.
Ah,
And you know what's really interesting? Babbling isn't just random noise.
no.
It's actually their first step in figuring out this whole language thing.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So how does babbling, which let's be real,
Yeah.
sounds pretty much the same from baby to baby?
Haha, right?
How does that help them learn their own language?
Well, you have to think about it from their perspective. When they hear us talking, it's this constant stream of sound.
Right.
Like, there aren't any pauses between words like we see when we're reading something. So their first big challenge is figuring out how to break down that stream into words.
That's such a good point. I never thought of it like that before. We just hear words.
Yeah,
But for them, it must be like listening to someone speaking a totally different language.
exactly. Where you can't even tell when one word ends and another begins.
Right.
So one of the ways they start solving this puzzle,
Okay.
at least for English, is by paying attention to stressed syllables.
Stressed syllables, like the part of the word we emphasize when we say it.
You got it. And these stressed syllables are really important
Okay.
because in English, they usually signal the beginning of a new word.
I see.
So babies start noticing this pattern and use it to segment the speech they hear.
So it's like those stressed syllables are little flags saying, hey, new word coming up.
Exactly. And you can actually see this in action.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that story about the child calling a giraffe a raff?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And a machine was a smidge, right?
Yes. So cute. But it's actually pretty smart when you think about it,
It is.
right? They're zeroing in on that stressed syllable,
Uh-huh.
which usually carries the most important information about what the word means.
Makes sense.
I mean, think about it. Raff still gets the point across, even if
Ah.
it's not the whole word.
Totally. It's like they're making their own little shorthand versions of words.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
And what about that classic nana for banana? Is that another example?
Absolutely. It's a perfect illustration of how babies simplify words by focusing on that stressed part.
That's fascinating.
And you know what's really cool? You see this across different cultures and languages.
Really?
Yeah, babies tend to make the same kinds of errors, which tells us a lot about how language learning works.
So they're starting to figure out how to break down speech into words, but then there's an even bigger challenge,
Right.
figuring out what those words actually mean.
You hit the nail on the head. And that's where things get really interesting. Because how does a baby know that cup refers to that specific thing
Right.
and not the table it's sitting on?
Whoa, yeah. That's a question I never even thought about.
It's a big puzzle.
It must be. They hear a word and they see all these things around them. How in the world do they know which one the word is referring to?
It's a classic problem in linguistics.
Oh, really?
It's called the ambiguity problem.
Ambiguity problem.
Words can have multiple meanings, and babies have to figure out the right one.
Hmm.
Let's take the example of apple. For you and me,
Yeah.
we hear apple, and we immediately picture that round red fruit.
Right.
But for a baby who's hearing this word for the first time,
Yeah.
it's not so easy.
It's not. I mean, they could be looking at all sorts of things when they first hear that word.
Exactly. And this is where things get really tricky.
Okay.
Because how do they narrow it down? They're not just passively soaking up information.
No.
They're like little detectives,
Little detectives.
using all sorts of clues to crack the code of language.
Okay, so what kind of clues are we talking about here? How do they eventually figure out that apple means that red thing and not say the person holding it?
That is the million-dollar question.
It is.
And it takes us to the next level of this whole language learning adventure.
Okay, so how do babies make that connection? How do they match a word like apple to the right object?
Well, one of the biggest clues they use is something we all do naturally,
Oh.
paying attention to what others are looking at when they speak.
Okay. So if I'm holding up an apple and saying, look at this apple.
Right. They're going to notice that I'm focused on the apple
Exactly.
and not like the lamp in the background.
You got it. It's called joint attention.
Joint attention.
And it's a really important part of early language learning. Babies are so tuned in to our gaze and gestures, and they use that information to figure out what we're talking about.
So it's not just about hearing the word, it's about combining that with what they're seeing.
Exactly. They're putting two and two together,
Uh-huh.
the sound apple and the sight of that red, round fruit, and boom, they start to make a connection.
It's like those aha moments we all have when we learn something new.
Yes, exactly like that.
Suddenly it all clicks.
And, another powerful tool in their detective kit is repetition.
Repetition.
Hearing that word apple again and again in different contexts really helps solidify that connection.
So it's not just one magical moment where they suddenly understand.
Right.
It's more like a gradual process of reinforcement. Exactly. Think of it like building a bridge between the sound and the meaning, brick by brick.
Yeah.
With each time they hear the word.
That's a good analogy. It also makes me think about how important it is to talk to babies even before they can talk themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
We're not just, entertaining them. We're
Right.
actually giving their brains data to work with.
Exactly. Every word they hear, every interaction is a chance for them to learn and refine their understanding.
And it's not just about single words either, right?
Nope.
They're also starting to pick up on grammar, how sentences are put together, all those subtle rules of language.
Exactly. They're little pattern-seeking machines.
It's amazing. So if they're figuring out these bigger patterns, does that mean correcting their grammar early on is really important? Like if they say good instead of went,
Yeah.
should we be jumping in and fixing it?
You know, a lot of parents think that.
Yeah.
But actually, research suggests that correcting them all the time can actually slow down their language development.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, imagine you're this little scientist trying out all these new words and phrases, and you keep getting told you're wrong.
Yeah.
It can make you less likely to try new things.
That makes sense. It's like they're constantly second-guessing themselves.
Right. And it can get in the way of them just freely exploring language.
So what's a better way to handle it if they say something grammatically incorrect?
Well, instead of correcting them directly, just model the right way to say it.
Okay.
So instead of saying, no, it's not good, it's went, you could say something like, oh, you went to the park. That sounds like fun.
So you're still giving them the right input,
Exactly.
but in a more positive and encouraging way.
Yes. You're giving them the information without making them feel bad about their mistake.
And this applies to all aspects of language, not just grammar.
Exactly.
Think about how we naturally change our speech when we talk to babies.
Oh, for sure.
We use simpler words, shorter sentences, and we repeat ourselves a lot.
It's true. We almost go into this baby talk mode. Yeah.
We do, but is that actually helpful for them, or are we just being silly?
You know, that baby talk actually has a really important purpose.
Okay.
It helps make the patterns of language more clear for them.
So it's like we're subconsciously giving them this simplified version of language to help them get started?
Exactly. Like training wheels for language learning.
I love that analogy.
And as they get more skilled, we naturally adjust our speech to match their growing abilities.
So it's this amazing dance between the learner and the more experienced speaker.
It really is.
That's so cool. And it makes me wonder, are there any other things we can do to support babies as they're learning language?
Well, one of the most important things is just to talk to them as much as possible.
Okay.
And I don't just mean giving them instructions or asking questions.
Right.
I mean really talking to them, narrating what you're doing throughout the day, reading stories, singing songs,
Right.
engaging them in real conversations.
So it's all about creating this rich tapestry of language experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the more varied those experiences, the better.
Okay.
Expose them to different types of language, like stories, poems, even conversations between adults.
Got it.
The key is to create a world where language is alive and present all around them.
This is making me rethink how I interact with my baby niece. I'm definitely going to start narrating my actions more and doing more storytelling.
I love that.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as talking can have such a huge impact.
It really can. And it reminds us that we all play a role in supporting the next generation of language learners.
So we've talked a lot about how important it is to just talk to babies,
Yeah.
expose them to language.
Yeah.
But what about all those formal learning tools
Right.
like flashcards or baby sign language? Do those actually help babies learn to talk faster?
That's a great question, and a lot of parents wonder about that.
Yeah.
While those tools can definitely be fun,
Yeah,
and they can be engaging for babies,
right.
the research on whether they actually speed up language development is kind of mixed.
So they're not like a magic solution to get babies talking earlier.
Not necessarily. The most important thing for language learning is still that good old-fashioned interaction with caring adults.
Okay.
Those everyday conversations, the stories, the songs, that's where the real magic happens.
It makes you realize we don't need all those fancy gadgets or expensive programs,
Yep.
right? The best thing for babies is just our time and attention.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that every baby learns at their own pace.
Of course.
Some might start talking earlier than others, and that's totally normal.
That's reassuring to hear. So if a parent is worried about their child's development, what should they do?
The best thing is always to talk to their pediatrician
Oh,
or a speech-language pathologist.
right.
They can figure out if there's anything to be concerned about and offer support if needed.
Okay, good to know. And speaking of reassurance, I think it's easy to get caught up in comparing our babies to others
Yeah, for sure.
and worrying about those milestones. But it sounds like the most important thing is just to enjoy those interactions with our little ones
Absolutely.
and trust that their brains are working hard behind the scenes.
Yes, those little brains are amazing.
They are. This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening for me. I feel like I understand the process of language development so much better now. What about you? What are some of the things that really stood out to you?
For me, it's just that reminder that babies are so actively involved in their own learning.
Yes.
They're not just sitting there passively absorbing information.
Right.
They're experimenting, making connections, figuring things out. It's really incredible.
They really are like little scientists, testing out hypotheses and learning about the world through language.
Exactly.
That's a pretty amazing thought.
It really is. And it makes you realize we can learn a lot from these tiny humans.
We can. So to everyone listening, next time you hear a baby babbling, remember it's not just cute noise.
It's much more than that.
It's the sound of a powerful learning machine at work, figuring out the secrets of human communication.
It's exactly.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.